Hello and welcome to episode 49 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I am your host. Today's episode is Ross Margitza, a smokin' jazz musician based in Los Angeles with an immense amount of wisdom and experience. Over the years, Ross has been present on the scene in Detroit, Chicago, LA, and Austin, where he did his DMA at the University of Texas, and has performed with jazz musicians such as Russell Malone, Phil Woods, John Faddis, Gerald Wilson, and Christian McBride. In this episode, we talk about the unique characteristics of different metropolitan jazz scenes. We also talk about Ross continuing the lineage of jazz pianists in his family, and a festival date with heavyweights where an ancient electric piano committed the ultimate betrayal. So moving on to the releases of the week, the first one that we want to plug is Tony Glaucey's single from a few months back, but released this year, called Forever Is Now. And this is actually a track that he and I talked about in his episode 37 of the show, where he wanted to put it on his previous full-length album release, which is called When It All Comes Crashing Down, but felt that it didn't quite fit the vibe just as much as the other tunes, so he wanted to save it for a future project. And I can tell you, it was worth the wait, and it really highlights Tony's ability to create a groovy, meaningful musical landscape. So if you want to support Tony and all of his releases directly, you can go to his website, which is tonyglaucey.com. You can also go over to tonyglaucey.bandcamp.com if you want to support that last full-length release that I mentioned just a few minutes ago and we plugged a few weeks back on Off the Bandstand, which is called When It All Comes Crashing Down. So that's over at his Bandcamp. And then if you want to keep up with all things Tony all the time, every day, you can go over to his Instagram, which is at Tony Glaucey. And then moving on to the second release of the week, this is from Michael Stevenson and Alexander Claffey. It is the third single that they have released off of an upcoming project that they have called Michael Stevenson Meets the Alexander Claffey Trio. And this album, other than obviously the two titled musicians that I just said, features Julius Rodriguez, Italy Morci, and Benny Benack III, who is featured as a soloist on this single, Greenbacks. And this was recorded in the revered Rudy Van Gelder studios and will be a joint release from Cellar Live and LA Reserve, which is featuring some of the most killin' musicians on the scene right now, including Brian Carter, Alita Moses, Benny Benack, Stephen Feifke. All of these people just really amazing musicians who are kind of leading the way in terms of releases and just jazz music in general. They are the next generation that is going to keep the music alive and well. So if you want to go and keep up with Michael Stevenson on Instagram, you can go over to his handle, which is at Sunny Step, which is his stage name. And you can also follow Alexander Claffey at Claffey Bass. So now moving on to the Monk shows of the week. The first one we want to plug is Mike Saylor's and the Higher Calling Orchestra with special guests. That's tonight, Thursday, June 24th. And let me tell you, every time that Mike Saylor's comes into that studio, he brings enough energy to power the ERCOT grid. So it is not to be missed. So tune into that and donate if you can. And the tickets for live studio audience are sold out, but certainly you can call and try to get on the waiting list, or you can just tune into the live stream. The second one we want to plug is the Andrew Friedrich, Richard Michael, and Daniel Dufour Trio, which is tomorrow, Friday, June 25th. So tune into that, another 3 set of heavyweights. On Sunday, June 27th, is Cameron Riggs' freshman recital. He wasn't a music major in college, but Cameron has been very present on the jazz scene. And so kind of as a joke, he was like, this is my freshman recital that I never got to have. So that's going to be on Sunday. Tune into that. And then the big special announcement that I've been keeping pretty close to the chest for this whole time is Off the Bandstand is doing a live episode with John Mills times 10 for episode 50 to celebrate John's 50th year in Austin, but also the 50th episode of the show. And I just could not be more excited to have a live studio audience as we kind of do a hybrid show of Monks where there's the music, and also Off the Bandstand where there is the kind of intimate way of getting to know and understand and hear stories and hear the perspective of such a luminary jazz musician, pillar of the Austin scene, John Mills. It is going to be so exciting. And moving forward, all of the shows are going to be, or all of the Off the Bandstand shows are going to be in the Monk space as the new set. And we have a new logo that we are debuting tomorrow that is from an old friend and collaborator of mine, Steven Swirsky, doing the graphic design. I am just elated. This is, I never thought that Off the Bandstand would turn into all of this with all of these musicians. I mean, it was just that would have been my wildest dream. And to have it come to fruition and be in reality now is just unbelievable. And I'm so grateful for you and for all the people who have been tuning into these shows and all the people who have been guests and all the people who have supported it along the way. I can't tell you how thankful I am and how much this has helped me to grow as a person and a musician and a thinker, just all of the above. This is just such an incredible opportunity and a privilege. That's really what it is a privilege to do this show. So thank you so much for tuning in. I just kind of, word vomited all over the place. So let's dive into this last episode in this space in my apartment from home, COVID style. Here is episode 49, Ross Margitza. This is Off the Bandstand. I'm so happy to see you, man. Like I talk about it all the time, but I'm like, man, like one of the greatest losses for Austin's jazz community has been the great Ross Margitza, man. So, but I'm glad that LA's treating you well.
You're too kind. Yes. I miss Austin. I miss it a lot. It's the thing about it is the hang. It was such a small but mighty community for jazz in Austin. Not to compare it to other places, but I had a chance to, I've been in LA now for 4 years, and I've been lived in Chicago for a couple of years. I've been, grew up in Detroit, and I spent a lot of time out in New York, heading back and forth from New York. And what I could say about Austin is, first of all, there's gigs out there. Even it looks like from looking at Facebook after the coronavirus, even though we're still going out with the coronavirus, but, now that stuff's reopened, Austin seems like everybody's, gigging at least to some capacity.
Yeah.
And LA stuff's still pretty slow out here, but I miss Austin. I miss the musicians. I miss it was a smaller community than LA is, and everybody knew each other, and there was a lot of work out there, and yeah, I love it. I love it. I miss it. I want to go back to visit sometime soon.
Please, man. Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like you also were able to secure kind of like and I'll talk about, I do want to talk kind of at length about the Michael Hale, Mac McIntosh. Boom. There is a Mike McIntosh also in town that is involved in jazz. So, but yeah. But anyways, I want to talk about that more later with the half step thing, but it seems like you even were able to secure, kind of a cushy gig over there in LA before everything shut down. What was it? Desert Rose?
Yeah, I played at the Desert Rose on Saturdays with a drummer. His name is Mark Z. Stevens, and he's been in LA I think his whole life, and he was a huge studio drummer or session drummer back in like the 70s and 80s, and he's still recording a lot. He still does a lot of recordings for it. I think he's recording a lot of like country stuff, like country and rock stuff.
Okay.
Anyways, he's involved with, I think, a producer or something like that that's involved with some of the country recordings going on in Nashville. So their band records, and then they send him the recording to add drums on top of it. So he does that from studios out here. I think he goes to Capitol Records and does recordings out there. But back in the day, he was the drummer for like the Gong Show and a bunch of other TV shows. So he kind of knows all the musicians who were like huge in like the recording scene back when it was hot out here in LA. So, and he was a part of that too. So it was kind of cool to network with him and to meet him. And he knows a lot of musicians in town. So it was nice. But yeah, I was doing that every Saturdays for a while. I think for probably 2 years I did that gig. It might happen again relatively soon. I'm not sure. But it was a nice little steak. It was a great location right in the middle of like Las Feliz, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump away from Hollywood.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a lot of fun. We had some good times in there.
Man, I'm curious about one thing. You told me once, and it's another thing I was going to talk about later. Is just that like you, in the most humble of ways, always had like really great advice and a lot of wisdom with different things that you would say. And I remember one time you came back and caught a gig over at the Highball that I was playing. Like it was like the year after you left. You came back for like a weekend or something like that. And I think you were maybe just about to get married to Lydia, or it was something around that time, or some other big life event was about to happen. And you were like, yeah, man, like the key is, build up a certain reputation and build connections in a certain city. And he's like, as scary as it is, you got to just like go to a new one and start over, which like you've said, like you did the Detroit thing, Chicago, Austin, LA. And there were kind of like these very kind of conducive things of also like going to school in these certain places. So it kind of like helps to, have something that anchors down, but it also puts you directly in the scene. So it's not just kind of like this endless game of King of the Hill where you're like crawling over everybody else to try to get to the top. Like the school thing kind of helps with that. But, moving out to LA and now especially having a family, like you were saying, having a wife and having a child, like, have you had the same desire to be just as like fervent in the hustle before family as you are out in LA? Or is it kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, I'm going to live some of that life that people are telling me to get into?
It's so funny that you asked me that question, because I talked with my wife about this. My wife's a performer too, but she's a vocalist and she's an actress. She does more musical theater. And when the coronavirus hit, we talked about, how much we miss playing and all this kind of stuff. And, it's funny because I miss playing with other people. I miss making music. I mean, it's what I do. It's what I love to do, but I don't miss the hustle. I don't miss the hustle. And I don't miss, having to, have a certain amount of gigs per week in order to pay your rent. That's scary, and it's a hard lifestyle. And that was me for a long, 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 long time. But now, I'm lucky. I have a full-time teaching gig at a really good school, and it kind of made me able to kind of forget about the hustle and to play gigs that I want to play instead of the gigs that I don't necessarily want to play, but I need to play.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of nice to be in that predicament, but part of me does miss, the full-time musician where I was, hustling and going from one gig to another gig and playing the gigs I didn't want to play because I was playing all the time. And I felt like I was maybe, because I was playing all the time, I was, maybe I don't really want to say I was in better shape, because I feel like, if you practice, you're going to be in as, really good shape. But it was just nice to be playing all the time. But I do love teaching too, and teaching's great, and it's just a different kind of passion, and I found myself as I developed and I'm still developing as a teacher. I find that I'm passionate about this stuff. I love doing it, and it kind of as much as I miss performing, it's kind of a nice it's kind of a nice other side of the spectrum. The teaching it's nice. It kind of makes up for the lack of gigging that I'm doing right now. So
I think sometimes the hardest thing can be like allowing ourselves to have that balance, because when we're so involved and so deep into the whole thing of like playing all the time, like almost every night of the week, and like maybe multiple gigs in a day, like of those, almost every night of the week, we feel almost as if like it's some sort of sign of defeat if we have any other kind of balance. It's like, no, I got to keep this schedule up, because if I like, start to bring the amount of gigs down, like you were saying, where it's like, no, I just want to play the gigs that I want to play, the ones that are super fulfilling, rather than filling the calendar for the sake of filling the calendar. I think that's something that there needs to be a much healthier conversation about. And I think the conversation is happening in a much larger way because of the pandemic. And I've talked about this on the show like before, but just this kind of thing about kind of returning to center and being like, okay, I really need to work through a lot of these other things and find out what the work-life balance is, because there are not the plethora of gigs to distract me from that. Especially when you're in a relationship. Like, I have to assume, well, I mean, I have to assume what it's like to be married and also like getting that full-time gigging thing going. But like, even just in a long-term relationship, like me and my Lydia are in, I should say my Lydia, so that way there's zero confusion. Like that's even something where she was like, hey, like, can we go on a vacation? Like before the pandemic, she'd be like, hey, can we go on a vacation? Let's just go to Colorado to a cabin for a weekend or something like that. And I'm like, okay, when are you thinking about it? And she'd be like, oh, like, I don't know, maybe September, October. And I'd be like, nope, it's not going to happen, because those are like the big things. And it wasn't like this thing where I was trying to be like an ass or anything like that and be like, no, we can't do that. But it's like, no, I would love to go in that time of year. So it's one of those things where it kind of returns to center and go, oh, I need to balance this kind of relationship, because the gigs are fleeting. The gigs will always be there, but the specific gig, the specific night, the specific venue, those are fleeting. To hold on to a residency for a long time is kind of a unicorn type situation, so it's kind of, it redirects your thinking onto like what really matters and what is lasting and right in front of you, even if you can't see it.
Yeah. Another thing too is, you're right. It's hard to get a residency, and then it's also hard to get a residency that's going to pay for a whole band. And, and if especially if that band is bringing business in, taking care of the band, paying them enough, are they going to feed or give them drinks or whatever? It's like little stuff like that. You see a lot less of that nowadays, I think, now. And well, part of the reason too is I think that bars and restaurants all over the country they're finding out that entertainment right now, there's so many young, and I shouldn't even say young, there's so many musicians, young and old, that will play at a venue and, work for tips, and that kind of, to me, that messes everything up. It's like, if you're a professional musician, this is what you do, you shouldn't just be playing for fun. You should be, if you're playing at a venue and you're bringing that venue business, then you got to be compensated, because you're part of the reason why that venue is so successful. Like you mentioned Half Step, Mac McIntosh and Michael Hale was working on a Tuesday night. Tuesday is probably, among all the nights of the week, it's probably, the most dead night. There's usually nobody going to the bar, but most of the time, every time that we played at Half Step, we had a packed house, and that's because people came to hear Mac, and people came to hear Michael Hill and Jimmy Blazer, and they hung. They hung until the last set, and they were drinking and having a good time. So that Tuesday night success at that place was because of Half Step, and they took good care of us there. They were first of all, they were super nice. Everybody in the band, they showed us respect. It was a great gig. It was something that I knew that when I was going to go to Half Step, we were going to be treated with respect by everyone in there, and we were going to have a blast. And the music was fun. We were sounding, we had some really cool stuff going on. But so that was our residency on Tuesday. And like you said, there's not a whole lot of stuff like that going on. There's not a lot of weekly gigs, people working every week at a certain venue. And I think that part of the reason is because you got musicians that are messing it up for the rest of us, and they need to take a step back and say, this is what we do professionally, and what you're doing is kind of just messing everybody up. So
yeah, man, absolutely. Yeah, Alex Brown posted a thing on Facebook, I think, about halfway through the pandemic. He's like, can we all agree, like right now, that when we come back, we're all going to be in solidarity of like a certain pay structure, and like nobody's going to undercut everybody, because like, let's not go back to this shit,
I love Alex, and he's another one. He's another person that's leaving pretty soon. I know he announced that on Facebook a couple weeks ago, and just I love Alex to death, and I couldn't agree more with him. With that post that he on Facebook, that was gold right there. I think that I think he's right. He's right, and I think that goes for every scene. For everywhere I lived. I'll tell you something really quickly. My grandfather and my dad are both musicians, and back in the 70s, my grandfather was working, and he was working. Talk about a 1 day a week residence. He was working at one place 5 days a week. Ooh. So they had live entertainment. It was like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday or Monday. I can't remember what it was, but he got paid. And this is back in the 70s, $100 a night, and in the 70s, you're making $500 a week plus tips. Yeah. That was pretty good money back then, now today, almost 50 years later, the gig is pretty much the same thing, if not less than that. You go to a gig, how much is the gig paying? Oh, it's paying a bill. If you're lucky, sometimes it's paying a bill. Sometimes it's paying $75, and so, everything, there's inflation on everything. The cost of living went up everywhere, housing, rent, gas, food, everything. Yeah. Where's the the musicians? Where's the price rate? Where the gigs stay the same, in the last 50 years. So I think that needs to be reevaluated, and I don't know how that's going to change, but I think that it needs to change, and hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Another point on that is that like when the initial shutdown happened, like second week of March, and everybody was like, all right, everybody stay home, just like every place became a ghost town. What did everyone do? They watched Netflix, they listened to albums, they played video games, they like looked at art, they did all these different things. And it was like, so it's like the thing that is least likely to get the most bread, but it's the thing that people rely on for their relaxation and for their entertainment, like quite literally, like more than anything else. And it becomes the most like, that's a whole stigma and a whole conversation that, I could go on for hours. I'm sure you could too. And every other musician that's just like, man, this needs to be way more appreciated from like a logistic standpoint, not just like, oh my gosh, I really appreciate your music. It's like, no, like put the money where your mouth is, in that kind of situation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and Apple and Spotify music, they're 10,000 plays, and musicians are only getting, a couple bucks in their pocket.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Crazy times, man. Well, I had kind of written down some notes, and one of the things that I put was I knew from your bio and reading different things that your father and grandfather were both professional pianists in Detroit. Were they both jazz or were they classical? Like, what was their concentration?
Yeah, but they played both. My dad was, he started off on classical piano, and then he kind of switched to jazz when he was like, maybe 13 or 14 years old, and he never looked back. He was actually a really talented classical piano player, but kind of left classical music and switched to jazz. And my grandfather was really both. He could play. He was more of an all around kind of piano player, but was really understood jazz and classical music. And world music. I mean, it was very hard to get him out of tune. He knew every song from the standard repertoire. And then he could play so much classical music. You can get him in name Italian music for him, and French music, and Spanish music, and Hungarian music, and he knew all the repertoire for all these different things, because it was it was a different kind of thing back then, where you had all people from all different parts of the world coming in. And restaurants back then, they wanted to hear certain music,
Sure.
So he knew a lot of tunes, but he also knew jazz. He was a great jazz piano player and a great classical piano player as well.
Yeah, man. So about that too, just kind of reading some of my notes here, it was like two generations of working jazz musicians or working musicians, regardless of genre, kind of know those struggles and that hustle all too well. So then you kind of growing up and watching that, did you have any internal pressure to follow in the craft? Because I know you were like playing piano by the age you were 6 and then trumpet by 10. And did you feel like watching them have that hustle gave you more of a discernment where you were able to learn lessons instead of the hard way just by watching what they had to go through? Or was it something that you weren't even mostly aware of like at that time?
When I was, my dad and my grandfather, they always made a pretty good living playing music, in Detroit, because I think that they've been around there so long, and they had such a good network, and they knew how to get gigs. They knew how to go to restaurants and hotels and to make it happen. And they knew the agents in town that were getting all the work, and they were kind of hooked up with those agents in town. So I was never really, that never really turned me away from music, but now that I'm thinking about it, I never really thought about it. I always knew it was tough. But I loved it so much that I didn't care, and at, 16, 17 years old, you really don't think about like, well, am I going to make enough money to, retire? You don't think about that kind of stuff at 16 or 17 years old, but I loved it. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So that was kind of, I just, I knew I wanted to go for it. And I just said, I'm going to just put 100% in, or unless I'm not going to do it. And yeah.
When you started playing trumpet, was that kind of a thing where you're like, okay, here I'm going to like pave my path of being a trumpet player, but I'll also have the skills of being a pianist as well? Or did you view trumpet as like, okay, I want to have a secondary, and then did those grow together kind of in tandem? Or was it something where one of them kind of fell off for a little bit and then you kind of traded off and on?
It was kind of the opposite. Trumpet was my primary for a long time. When I was, 9, 10 years old, when I was like maybe 7 or 8, I started taking piano lessons, and I was studying with my grandfather, but I also went to another private teacher for classical piano.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of trouble. I couldn't read music on piano. I was just really struggling. I had no left hand, right hand coordination on the piano. And then I picked up the trumpet in elementary school, and I was like kind of a natural thing for me. I was able to get a sound out on the trumpet, and like within like a couple months, I was able to play the chromatic scale going up, octave and a half, and then back down, and I was able to do it pretty fast. And my dad told me, you should stick with the trumpet. Like that sounds like it's more. When I was like 10 years old or 11 years old, that's the sound. It sounds like more of your natural instrument.
Sure.
It sounds like this is something that you can really do. And I stuck with trumpet, and I went through classical trumpet. I did a lot of studying on the trumpet. Went through, I studied with. I took a couple lessons from the first trumpet player of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, Ramon Parcells, and studied with a couple other great trumpet players. And then as I was learning on trumpet, I was still kind of fooling around on piano. I wasn't like necessarily studying it, but I was able to like pick stuff up, and I had a pretty good ear. So I would listen to recordings, and without transcribing, like transcribing note for note, I was transcribing. I was just like picking up the ideas I liked.
Yeah.
And I was learning about like theory and harmony from my dad and my grandfather. Like they showed me something on the piano, and I learned it, and then I figured that out, and then from that I figured something else out.
Okay.
And then when I was like 15 years old, I started subbing for my dad and my grandfather on solo piano gigs, because by then, 15, 16, I was able to play solo piano, and I was was learning tunes. I was bringing like a real book into like I was playing at hotels when I was 15, 16 years old. So I always had, like the piano kind of progressed as trumpet was progressing, but trumpet was still my main instrument. And then I went to Michigan State University for undergrad. I was a trumpet major. And my freshman year, I'm majoring in trumpet. I kept on getting calls for gigs on piano. And 4 years, I was getting called my whole 4 years gigging on piano. So I was not a piano major, but I was probably gigging more than every piano player that was, that was there.
All the piano undergraduates and graduate students were like, this asshole, taking all of the gigs, but continue.
Well, there weren't that many piano players that were in the program, because Michigan State was just starting. They just started a master's program, like my second or third year there, and there was maybe 2 or 3 jazz piano majors, and I was a trumpet major. But I just was lucky because I've been playing. I had been working and had the music in my ears since I could remember. And then after that, after Michigan State, I was like, I felt just as comfortable on piano as I did on trumpet, and I decided to go get my master's degree, and I did a double master's.
Okay. And
then once I graduated with my master's, it was kind of like, we know you play trumpet, but we need a piano player. So we're going to keep on. It's like every gig that I was getting called was in Chicago. I was living in Chicago and teaching at Northern Illinois University. Every gig I was getting called for was piano, and I went on the road for piano and so on. So I kind of, as time went, I would start off as a trumpet player, but as the gigs came in, I was a piano player.
Man, how does Detroit to Chicago to Austin compare? In the scene of each one of those, like, was there kind of a learning curve of each one, or did it feel pretty familial everywhere?
Yes and no. So if I had to, Detroit to me it's closer to the New York jazz scene in terms of the way cats play out there. It's very cutthroat. It's very, people in Detroit play with a lot of energy, and it's all about swing. At least when I was there, stuff's been changing in the last little bit. You have a lot of younger cats on the scene out there, but growing up in Detroit, I was lucky because I had a chance to meet some of the elders who are no longer with us. And I remember as a kid, I used to go hear a saxophone player named Larry Nazaro play. And, I was maybe 12 or 13 years old. And he sounded like Cannibal Adderley. And he was actually, if you ever check out Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, you hear the saxophone intro on that. He's the saxophonist on that. He did all the Motown recordings in Detroit back in like the 50s and the 60s. Or maybe 60s and 70s. He did all the Motown stuff. But I had a chance to hear him, and then a great trumpet player, Marcus Belgrave, got a chance to talk with him and meet him and listen to him play. Another trumpet player named Lewis Smith. Lewis Smith was, he was a Blue Note recording artist. He actually recorded with Cannibal Adderley. And he was the sad thing is he got in a car accident. And I think he was maybe his late 30s or 40s, and he kind of messed up his lips, and he was still able to play. He still sounded fantastic, but from what people told me, it kind of took a toll on his trumpet playing for a little bit. But he was supposed to be, the next kind of New York big trumpet jazz sensation, and he started teaching, I think, in the Detroit area. I think that's where he taught, was the Detroit area. But he was a legend. We had all these legends in Detroit. George Sax Benson was another one. It's a great sax. I actually studied with him. I studied theory of harmony with him. So I was lucky because we had that. And those were the guys that were the mentors to Kenny Garrett and James Carter, and to Rob Hurst and Rodney Whitaker, who was the director of jazz studies at Michigan State, where I went to. Those were kind of their mentors And I got a chance to hear them play, and they left a staple in the jazz scene, because Detroit was a hard bop town. You know, it wasn't like an avant-garde town. It wasn't a free. It wasn't a you know, you had a lot of soul with Motown going on there and everything, but when you went to the jazz clubs, everybody was playing hard bop. It was straight ahead. Everybody was swinging. So that was kind of the vibe out there. Everybody played hard and they swang hard, and it was a beautiful thing. Chicago was a bigger city than Detroit. And the thing about Chicago was, you know, you still had that rich history. You had on the south side of Chicago, you had Von Freeman, who passed away now. But Von Freeman was like a really great tenor saxophone player, and he inspired so many of the younger generation, the musicians. And Von was, it's hard to categorize the way he played. Actually, I had a chance to hear him play maybe 3 or 4 times. He used to play on the south side of Chicago. I can't remember the jazz club, but I used to go hear him all the time. It was a jam session out there. This was 10 years back. But since then he passed away. But he inspired so many of the musicians. But Chicago they did have a hard bop scene, and cats played straight ahead. To me, it was just there was a lot more of a newer music scene out there where cats were playing more original music. They were definitely playing more of their original compositions. They were definitely playing more modern stuff by you know guys like Kurt Rosenwinkel and Robert Glasper. Well, Robert Glasper wasn't really making his move back then, but it was more getting into newer music. But they had some really great musicians out there in Chicago, and it just, to me, it wasn't as hard bop oriented as maybe Detroit was, but still, there still were some great swinging musicians out in Chicago, like really heavy hitters out there. And then Austin, to me, Austin, especially going into UT's program, I think the focus was more on definitely more contemporary and newer music. I knew that they would make a lot of the graduate students, as well as Dr. Mills, John Mills, would write a lot for the jazz orchestra out there.
Yeah.
And then, you have groups like the Now Orchestra, which is all original music. You have a lot of the younger UT musicians and the musicians from Texas State playing a lot of more newer music, more modern music. But at the same time, I think that they do have a very rich understanding of the tradition and of swinging. You have great musicians out there as well. But Austin's a lot smaller of a city than Chicago, and even than the jazz scene. Well, maybe even Detroit. I don't know. Detroit had a pretty big jazz scene when I was there. But to me, Austin definitely is a little bit more, after Chicago, kind of more a little bit more modern music. But there's so many guys out there in Austin and great musicians and can really play. And LA, I don't even know where to go with LA. LA is so it's really not traditional at all. There's really hardly any groups that are playing the tradition, hard bop or swinging. Or the one group that I can think of was the Kevin Cannon group, which I played with Kevin for in his quintet for 2 years out at the Mint on Monday nights. We did that every other Monday, and it was a jam session. We opened it, and man, Kevin likes to hit. He likes to call tempo, 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3. That's his beat. And he's one of the few guys out here in LA that's actually playing the tradition. I'd say most of the jazz musicians are really doing cross-generification, doing a lot of original compositions, and that's kind of the scene out here. And it's been like that for such a long time because fusion. This is kind of like where all the fusion musicians, this is like, I mean, I don't want to say it started here because I don't think it did, but I would say this is like the fusion mecca of the world.
Yeah.
New York would be like more of the bebop, hard bop mecca of the world. And it's kind of carried, the fusion musicians kind of carry the torch into musicians today, and it's a lot of more modern, contemporary. That's kind of the scene out here. But there's still great musicians that can play, the shit. But they don't do it very often. You got to get them on a jam session when they want to stretch out and play.
Yeah, man. And that's got to be so invaluable to have been present for a considerable amount of time in each one of these scenes. So that way, like, you can just understand different vibes, different cultures, and how the jazz scene, in terms of its kind of, I was just telling somebody yesterday who was not a jazz musician, where they were like, how do we get jazz or people to be like really interested in jazz when they only think that it's just, Sinatra tunes or whatever. And I was like, well, the difference between jazz and like current pop music is that like jazz has this thing where, or I'll say this about like pop music, and I don't want to speak definitively about pop music because I realize I'm 25 and I don't know shit, but like pop music is kind of where it's very, use it, throw it away, use it, throw it away. It's like those K cups for the Keurig machines, and they're just constantly like focusing on what's next. But like the jazz culture and history is so much more about like, okay, cool, here's this one, decade. And now we're going to take that and we're going to put it in our like catalog of things that we can do. And then we're going to take the next thing and then we're going to add that on. And it's a snowball effect where it's just making this like all encompassing kind of umbrella that is jazz, that has so many different colors and different subgenres that can speak to a very wide variety of different audiences, like people like you were talking about, Robert Glasper, and then you have, Oscar Peterson, and that was another thing that I wanted to ask you about too, was, you said that in your bio that you knew you wanted to play jazz after listening to West Side Story from Oscar Peterson. And, like, I'm not sure exactly at what age that was, but like kids love superheroes and comic books. And like listening to OP is about as like close to being a superhero as like you can get, like listening to them play, maybe save only for like Art Tatum, but like, like that's like a whole thing. So in your words, like, and understanding like what you felt when you decided like this is what I want to do, not to just jump kind of further back, but what was that kind of visceral feeling like for you when you heard him play? How would you describe it?
Gosh, well, I always had great piano players. The recordings going on in my house. I was lucky because my grandfather loved to listen to music, and I kind of grew up in the same house. We had a house where it was a 2-family house, but my family, my mom and my dad and my brother lived upstairs, and then my grandfather and my grandmother and their son, they had a son that was only 2 years older than me. So he's like my older brother. They lived downstairs, and it was a big house. But I remember going downstairs every morning, and when I was a little kid, and my grandfather would be playing either classical. Pianist would be like watching a VHS, some great classical piano player, or listening to like a recording of Oscar Peterson, Bill Evans, Art Tatum. We always had that on in our house. Keith Jarrett. So I always had that sound of what a great pianist sounds like in my head. But it wasn't until I watched that movie. My dad, I think when I was 7 years old, we rented from like Blockbuster. We rented like West Side Story because my dad wanted to show me the music in it. Because I was, and I remember watched the movie, and then the next day we went to the record shop. We bought a CD, and my dad bought the CD. Oscar Peterson plays West Side Story, and I remember watching the movie and hearing like the original Leonard Bernstein, score, and I was, it was amazing, like to hear like the songs, and even at that age, I knew that the music was like beautiful, it was so special. And then I heard Oscar Peterson play the same stuff, and I listened to his take and the arrangements and how he made a trio. It just sounded like so much more than a trio. It sounded just as big as like the full orchestra that Leonard Bernstein orchestrated for, so it was just, to me, that was incredible. And I remember I had that CD. I can't remember how old I was. It might have been 8 or 9, something like that. And I remember I listened to that CD so much that you can see through the CD. After skipping all over the place, you have to like forward again, and I wore it out so much that you can see through the CD that so much. I was playing that CD. I remember I can sing every note of that whole entire album of Oscar solo. I can sing every one of his. I probably still can today, and it's been a long time since I heard a lot of those tracks, but I feel like because I listened to that so much, it became like ingrained in me. But that was like, it was like learning a new language, And you mentioned about explaining to somebody what jazz is, and to me, it's a language. It's a language. Like, what is swing? How do you teach somebody how to swing, or how do you teach somebody how to play bebop? Well, it's the same thing like how to teach somebody how to speak Spanish. Like you can teach them a word in Spanish, and they know that word, but that doesn't mean that they can speak Spanish. The way that you learn how to speak Spanish is by, you listening to people converse in Spanish, and then once you have that understanding of how you're able to understand, then you try to speak with them in Spanish, in their language, and then you're able to speak Spanish. The same thing if you're trying to learn the language of bop. You have to listen to Charlie Parker and Cannibal Adderley and Sonny Stitt and all these great bop musicians, and you get that in your ear and you internalize it and let it ingrain in you. Let it get ingrained, and then you try to emulate once you have that inside you. And I think that's the real way that you learn the language of blues, swing, bop, all those different elements. And as a teacher now, that's what I'm figuring out. It's more listening. And what I find myself as a teacher is I can give kids, listening assignments and tell them, okay, check out this recording, this week. Let's try to listen to this whole record, on Apple Music or Spotify or YouTube, and check it out. And I find that the kids that really do go home and do their homework and play this record and listen to the whole entire album and have it on repeat while they're doing their homework or something, they're the ones that eventually learn the language and develop, and because that's what it is. Now you have kids nowadays, and I'm not saying I'm a high school. I teach high school right now.
Sure.
They want to learn how to play this music without doing any of the homework. You have to do the homework, and that's just putting on a record and listening. That's so important. But anyways, the Oscar was like kind of my getting into that. That's when I realized, this is what I want to do. Is I want to be a musician. I didn't know whether I wanted to play piano or trumpet at that point. I think I was primarily getting into piano at that point, but I knew I wanted to be a musician.
Yeah.
At that point. Yeah.
I think, talking about the whole thing of you're like, people want to play the music, but don't necessarily want to put in the work, and not even like put in the work just on like practicing their instrument. Maybe they're like gung ho about that, but they don't want to listen to all this other stuff, because I think human nature, especially as a musician, is like, there's a pressure of like, okay, people don't want to come hear me just play other people's stuff. Like, I have to be bringing something to the table. So it's almost like people are wanting to skip those steps. And I have been guilty of this. And I would wager to say, like, a lot of us have been guilty of this, where we just go, no, I want to skip over to where I'm creating like my sound or whatever. But like, really, and again, what do I know? But like, I think that it's this whole thing of like, if someone has their own sound and they can just like not listen to anything other than just a little bit of the language, and they go, okay, cool. Nope. Yep. This is my sound. Boom. Good to go. They are an incredibly lucky and alien of a person to be able to do that, because your sound comes from like it's an aggregate of all of the things that speak to you. And I think the way that I was able to stop viewing listening to records as a task oriented thing and more of like a no, I want to learn this, was just zeroing in on the people that like you like. Because I think at the beginning it's this thing of, oh, every big name I have to like them because of the fact that, you know, and they have to be my favorite and I have to be totally involved in every single note that they play because they're a big name. But it's just a difference of different things, right? Like this is a very brazen example, a very commercial kind of example, but like the Frank Sinatra thing, I don't dig on that. And I've been pretty vocal about that in the past couple of years, that like I thought I was supposed to, and I listened to all of the records or many of the records, and I tried to model after that sound. And then I would get to the gigs like me and you would be playing, and I would be doing that kind of sound, and I'd be like, okay, I just sang in the head, and then Ross is setting the piano on fire, you know, just like burning, you know, just like playing amazing lines. And I was like, I don't feel fulfilled right now because I've sung the head in. I don't know the art of improvisation through like scatting at this point to where it's like actually having something to say. It's more of just trying to emulate whatever I think it is that I'm supposed to do. And then I was like, I think I need to go listen to just horn players. I don't want to listen to singers anymore. And then of course I got on the Cordelling train, and then it was all over from there. But you know, it's that thing of stop listening to music, stop listening to certain artists or jazz musicians as if it is supposed to be a task, but a almost like start viewing it as like asking your grandfather to tell you about his grandfather, you know, and learning the lineage and learning what each one of their legacies were, and then how you can appreciate that, but then also not just become a jukebox where you can start to absorb that and contribute moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's just, you know, at the end of the day, you're going to listen to the people and the sounds that you like. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can have a teacher tell you, you know, you need to transcribe this solo and learn this entire solo, or learn this whole recording, everything from this, you know, but if you don't really like it, then, you know, then it could be kind of a waste of time. You know, I mean, I don't want to say a waste of time, because you can definitely get a lot of great stuff from transcribing, you know, because it could help you with your technique, or it could help you with your sound, or something like that. But as far as developing your language as a musician, you know, like you know, you mentioned that you know, maybe the Sinatra thing is not your thing. You know, that doesn't mean that Sinatra might not, you know, it's not trying to take anything away from Sinatra, because obviously he made his mark and everything. But for you, you know, you might want to go like a different direction with your sound, because that's where you see yourself going. So I think that at the end of the day, you know, every musicians are going to go, you know, what they like and what they feel, and I think that as you get older too, that changes, because if you even take a look at like Coltrane, you know, and Miles, and even Cannonball, all these musicians, they changed. Like every 10 years, Coltrane went from, you know, this bebop saxophone player getting into more hard bop and post bop, and then eventually getting into, you know, more modal and Love Supreme, and then getting his way into free jazz, you know. And Miles, same thing. I think everything just, you know, you go through different stages, and, you know, and different, you want to reinvent yourself as a musician. And,
Right.
But yeah, people get off, people get on my case, because, you know, you mentioned Sinatra. Well, I'm not a big fan of Monk, and people get on my case about that. I'm not talking about him as a composer. I think he's a brilliant composer.
Sure.
I think he's but as a piano player, you know, I'm not really, he's not one of the pianist that I listen to every morning when I wake up. I don't put
Sure. Fair enough. Yeah.
But I know I have a lot of friends who are great, fantastic piano players that Monk is their thing, and Monk is kind of like who they feel is like, yeah, that's the guy, that's the man,
That's the cat.
And
Yeah.
I just can't get into it, but they can, and I still love I love their play.
Right.
And they found a way to make it work. For me, it's just not me, and but I will say people have been giving me a lot of shit throughout the years because I say that, so and I know I'm saying this on an interview that's being recorded, but I try not to tell too many people that, and maybe I shouldn't tell you that right now, but yeah, so I mean, I understand when you say that, and I think that's fine. You don't have to like everybody that, just because so and so likes them or everybody else likes them. Like who you want to like, or like sound like who you want to sound like. I think that's more appropriate.
Because then to say that it's like, oh yeah, if you didn't like Monk, and then also when you were like, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I'll just put like a censor bar on the name, and I'll put a black censor bar over your mouth, so like the essence is there, but you're absolved of any controversial statements. No, but so even if you didn't like Monk, it's that idea of if you went along with it, then it becomes so much more performative and less honest to be like, oh yeah, Monk's the cat, man. He's like really great. And then it's like, who is that helping? And for what purpose are we saying that we really like this person? Other than the fact of like, we just think that it's convention that we should say that we like that person. But
exactly,
there's literally no point to it other than trying to stay in the good graces of somebody, which chances are you're going to say it and then the person's going to forget about it in 5 minutes and then they're going to go on about their lives. So it's like, just approach it with honesty. Same with everything else.
There's some guys that they ask me, who's your favorite piano players, and I'll tell them, I'll name down a list and I'll mention Oscar to them, because Oscar's one of my heroes, and sometimes some people say, he can play, but it's just not my thing, and in the back of my mind I'm thinking like, I can't talk to this guy anymore. Know what he's talking about. No, but honestly, that's not their thing, and that's cool because Oscar had a certain direction that he went. It was a certain kind of thing that he did that was different than, let's say, a Bud Powell, or different than a lot of the other piano players at that time period. And if they're not into that, that's their choice. You can't make somebody change their mind. It's all that's why I think music's so unique. It's so wonderful because and same thing with different styles. There's so many styles out there of music, and now it's kind of all crossing into you have different styles crossing and forming all these styles, and not everything is you don't need to like every style. I don't think I met everybody that likes every style of music. It's all what you like. It's all unique to the individual, and I think that's why music's so great.
Yeah, man. Well, man, before too long, I wanted to just circle back around to the Half Step gig and just ask. You said that it was a great gig because of the fact that the venue was very respectful. The audience was always going to feel like a community, like all these different things. But what was it like, from an interpersonal standpoint? Because like also Mac McIntosh is one of those people, like whenever I listen to him and watch the videos, I just go, oh man, this, like, first of all, he's just like, he is one cool MF. Like he is like just really, really cool and very relaxed. And again, like in the same like train of thought that we're on with like honesty, like it doesn't feel like he's trying to, give what the audience necessarily wants. It's just like, this is me being as honest and putting my soul out there exactly how it is. And what you hear is what you get, what you see is what you get. But it also feels like the group was just so tight with Michael Hale and you and Jimmy Blazer. Like, what was that like interpersonally to have that family to come together with, at least once a week, if not more?
Oh, it was great. It was great. I think we developed a bond. Uh, I think it happened quick. I think it happened quickly. I played with them for um, about a year and a half. Almost the whole time I was in Austin, I played with Mike, Mac, and Jimmy. And I'd say, I did the gig with them. They called me on Tuesday night. I don't know. I don't know what happened. I think one of the piano players bailed out, or something happened. But anyways, they called me on Tuesday night, and I was actually teaching at UT. I was teaching a combo at UT, and that got done, I think, at like 8 o'clock, and we started at 8.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, you know what, just whenever you're finished, just come on down. You have your keyboard on. I said, yeah. And I came on down there. I think I got there like at 8:10 or 8:15.
Yeah.
I set up real quickly, and then we did a quick sound check, and we hit. And it felt great. It felt great playing with them. And I could say that as the more we played, we came up with these arrangements that were just like instantly happened. Like we just try something one time on the bandstand behind, Mac would be singing something, and I'd look at Jimmy and I just make a face at him, and he kind of know where we would be going harmonically. And Michael would just hear it and just like do something with it, and we would remember it. And then the next week we tried again, and then just became a part of what we did on that song.
The book. Yeah.
So it was I think the reason why I liked playing with them so much is because there was no music. There was no music whatsoever. There was no charts. There was nothing. It was call tune, pick a key, whatever key, Max sang it in, and then do something with it. And even if it means, letting Max stretch out for 5 minutes at the end of a tune and just kind of grooving at the end and building it, and then taking it somewhere else, bringing it back down. So it was just kind of, it was very organic in a sense that we weren't reading any music. It was just kind of like it was all about just feeling the moment and feeling the, where we were in the music. And then we all felt together when it was time to kind of go on or where to take it. And we had a great connection. I think that if I was to play with them tomorrow, I don't think that connection will go anywhere, even though it's been almost 3 or 4 years since I played with them, since the last time I played with them. But yeah, they're great. It was a great experience doing that gig with them. I miss them a lot. I talked to Mac about 2 weeks ago and checked up on him, and we keep in touch still. And if I ever come back to Austin, I definitely want to go to have some, not even to play, but just to go check them out and listen to them play, because I miss it.
That's a lot of trust and a lot of attentiveness. I was making this analogy to somebody, or might have been on an episode the other day, but it's a lot like any kind of relationship, like romantic or otherwise, just a lot of trust, attentiveness, and like willingness to just go exactly where you're going to go and not even need words to do it. Man, that's beautiful. I just want to go back to that gig now. And they're playing again, I think every Tuesday now at the club too, but yeah, man, we got to get you in town for like some Monk shows, and ironically, Monk shows with the Monk comment. Yeah, you're barred from playing at Monk's now. Colin's not gonna allow. No, I'm just joking. No, but man, we got to get you into town. But one last thing before the two speed round questions was Carmen Bradford told me a story of when she first got picked up with the Basie band, and she was about to like go outside and like hang out with her friends, and answered the phone, and the person was like, "Is this Carmen Bradford?" And she was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Hi, this is Count Basie." And she was like, shut up. Like, he thought it was her friends. Like, don't punk me like this. I'm waiting on this call, and hung up on him. And then he called back and he's like, please don't hang up on me again, because I won't call back, you know? The last thing I wanted to ask about this main point is getting the call from Russell Malone. Was that a similar type thing where you're like, am I being punked right now? Because this is Russell Malone, you know?
Yeah, that was a great experience. You know, he actually did he call me? I forgot who called me. Anyways, it was a buddy of mine in town. He's actually a great bass player. To me, he's one of the top bass players in LA, if not the top jazz bass player in LA. His name is Mike Garola, and we're really good friends. We're really he's a good pal of mine. But Mike actually recommended me for that gig with Russell Malone, because he played with Russell in the past, and I got a call. I got a call from Russell, but I didn't answer it because it was, I don't like to answer numbers. I like to let it go to voicemail.
Sure.
So he left me a voicemail, and he told me that, give him a call back, and that I should be expecting a call from the club owner, which I got, and it was cool. It was in Palm Desert, so it was kind of a hike to get out there. But what was cool about that gig was I met Roy McCurdy on that gig, who's a drummer in LA, and Roy played with Cannonball Adderley, Nancy Wilson, Sarah Vaughan, and he also played with Oscar Peterson. So before the gig started, I'm sitting back and I'm hanging out with Russell and Roy, and Russell too, we all picked Roy McCurdy's brain, because he's 84 right now. And he's a living legend. We picked Roy McCurdy's brain for probably an hour before the gig started, just hanging with him. And then after that gig, I wound up playing maybe 5 or 6 gigs with Roy at the Lighthouse, and then a bunch of different places in town. And then we played, actually, I think it was a week before the coronavirus hit. We played our second gig with Russell, and that was the last time I got a chance to play with him. But it was a great experience. It was great, getting a chance to meet him, play with him, and to get a great chance to play with Roy. It was a really, really fun gig. I'm so glad I got a chance to do that while I was here, because I've been listening to him since, he recorded with some of my heroes, with Monty Alexander and Benny Green and Ray Brown and Jimmy Smith. So I've been listening to Russell for a long time, and it was just an honor to get a chance to play with him again.
Heavies, man. Here's hoping it happens many, many more times now that the gigs are hopefully coming back in LA sooner rather than later. Man, so the last two speed round questions are, one, if you had a record, a singular record, or if it's hard to pick, 2 or 3, could be just whatever you're listening to this week, this month, all time favorite, whatever, what would you suggest people go listen to as soon as this is over?
Oh man. Somebody I've been checking out recently, speaking of Monty Alexander, there's one called Alexander the Great. That's probably, I've been checking that one out a lot. I put that at my number 1 right now. Alexander.
Okay.
Yeah.
Boom. Done. And then the last question is one of my favorites. It's we all have gigs from hell where things go totally sideways. If you can think about from either Detroit, Chicago, Austin, LA, any of these different places, of all the gigs from hell that we've had, not necessarily you and me together, but we, the proverbial we, which gig stands out as the ultimate gig from hell, and what happened?
I have a bunch of them. But I'll tell you, the one that kind of sticks out the most was, I was a junior in college, junior or senior in college at Michigan State, and I got called to play the Jazzin' on Jefferson Jazz Festival in Detroit with Ronnie Whitaker and Carl Allen on drums. And it was kind of like my first, it wasn't my first time playing with, I had a chance to play with some heavy hitters before that, but Carl Allen, one of the great drummers, and Ronnie Whitaker, who I was the director of jazz studies at Michigan State, but this was kind of was kind of cool to play at the jazz festival. So I'm playing, and I'm right in the middle of my solo, and there wasn't a real piano on stage. There was an electric piano. And
At a jazz festival?
At a jazz festival, yeah.
All right.
And it was kind of it was a real, I don't even remember the model of it, but it seemed like it was ancient. And this was over 10 years ago. This was maybe 12 or 13 years ago now. It seemed like it was ancient. And I remember I'm right in the middle of my solo, and I'm getting into it, and I'm feeling like, okay, this is it. This is the one. You know, they're going to love this, because I'm like, really getting into it. And all of a sudden, piano just stops. Nothing's coming out. Everything just stops working, and Rodney and Carl are just looking at me, and they're like, what are you doing? What's going on? Why'd you stop? And the piano's broke. So then the saxophone player, one of my former professors, Diego Rivera, comes in. He just starts covering in for me.
Yeah. And
I was like, felt like just complete, it's like you're getting on the high. You're almost there, and just somebody takes all your high away. It's just,
no, man.
But I have some other gigs, but that to me is the one I remember, because I guess it was with Ronnie and Carl. And I remember that solo, and I was like, felt so good about it. And then the piano just died on me. There was a short. Eventually, they fixed it, or they got I can't remember if they got another keyboard up there or what happened. But yeah, that's my gig story.
Damn, it's like you're like, I can just see my whole career like in front of my eyes, like the whole, like it's gonna just like, and then, boom, falls flat. Yep. Damn, that is a tragedy.
Yeah, it was a letdown, but it wound up being okay. We finished the gig, and that's all that matters. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, man, Ross, it is so good to see you and talk to you for an extended amount of time, man. Please come to Austin soon. We'll get you down for a variety of different things, but man, we got to get you back in town for something soon.
Thanks for having me out, man. I was checking out your recording. This was before you contacted me to do this. I was checking out your recording in my car. This was about maybe a month or two ago. And that track on, From Dusk Till Dawn, when you did the last track, that's Dawn, right?
That's Dawn, yeah.
And there's that one moment where you and David Mestetique are I forgot the lyrics, but he plays such a beautiful chord, and there's like a little pause there, and I just remember listening to that, and it made my day. Like the rest of the day, I felt great after listening to that. So yeah, that was a fun recording. I was glad I could be a part of that one.
Man, that's so nice, man. Yeah.
Another one that came out after that?
There's another one that came out after that. Yeah, I remember feeling this like need to get another one out, because that was that record. Because also, listeners, Ross is on that record and sounds amazing. Like, because you're on the My Funny Valentine and Cherokee and a bunch of the other tracks. I think you're on Night and Day too. I can't exactly. Saga for sure. You were on Saga. But anyways, I remember after that record came out, that's when I made the switch where I was like, I'm done with the Sinatra thing. So then I was like, I got to get a new record out that's like less of that direction. But yeah, and then David and I are working on 4 right now to be recorded now that things are kind of opening back up. So yeah, man, it'll be fun. But that means so much to me. Thank you for rechecking it out, and everybody go listen to it, if nothing else, for Ross's incredible playing, man.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great, and hopefully I'll make my way back to Austin pretty soon, and come check out your gigs and everybody else, and say what's up. I can't wait.
Sweet, man. So good to see you, Ross. Thank you so much. Peace.
Good to see you too. Take care, brother. Bye.